What is insurance?
Sure. Insurance transfers certain risks between parties.
Without insurance, the economy would really stop.
In simple terms, insurance is like community.
It's protecting every last asset that somebody has built over a lifetime.
You're in it together. You feel supported.
From the beginning to the end.
What insurance is just taking care of people. It's definitely a way of life.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion following the screening of the Philadelphia 11. My name is Lauren King, and I'm thrilled to be here with the film's director and producer, Margot Guernsey. Hello, Margot.
Hi, Lauren. I'm excited for our conversation. Thank you for having me.
I am too. Thank you for allowing us to see this fascinating documentary. I'm just going to begin with how you came to it. When did you hear about it, and how did you know that it was going to be something you wanted to tackle as a documentary?
This is a popular question. I am not Episcopalian, and a lot of people assume that I might be because of the nature of the story, obviously. I was raised in a UCC church in Western Massachusetts, Williamstown, for those of you who know the area. And I learned through the process of making this film that, in fact, the Episcopal Church across the street had one of the very first women priests. I didn't know that, but growing up, if I'd seen a priest in town with a collar, and it's a very small town, she would have been a woman, at least from the Episcopal Church. So, I very much am a student of the civil rights movement. I came up as a union organizer, and I thought I knew the movement history of our country. And so I'm somebody who, as somebody who feels like they already know something. And then, I was born in 1974, so you can age me a little bit. In 2012, I was working on a different project, and I reached out to the Reverend Carter Hayward, who many of you now know through the film, if you don't know her personally. I reached out to her to do some research on something else. And actually, that something else is Paulie Murray. So, in the film, Paulie Murray also comes in. And I didn't know who she was. I probably should have done some research before I talked to her, but I didn't know who she was. And as she was trying to tell me about Paulie Murray, she had to tell me her own story. And I was floored. I felt like, how is it possible that I don't know this? I mean, this to me, the idea of leadership, of women's leadership in faith, I think is something that secular audiences miss the boat on all the time, right? Faith institutions are extremely important in our society, whether or not we have a government where church and state are separate. And if women of a faith tradition coming forward and saying, I am called to lead, and being told no, and then finding a way to change, to follow that call despite being told no, to me is a story for me and for everybody. How did they do that with grace? How did they do that in solidarity and succeed and continue to share their ministry with others? So that's why it's a story that resonates with me, and that's kind of how the journey started.
Well, your past two films that you directed, Councilwoman and No Time to Fail, were more overtly political, but this is political too. I would like you just to talk a little bit about how it felt political to you, and were you drawn to that aspect, and how also it was different.
So this is not, those two films specifically address our political system. So one is about a hotel housekeeper who sits on the Providence City Council, so she is an elected official. And the other one is about election administrators in Rhode Island in 2020 who administered our presidential election. So those are both specifically about our political system. This one is about a barrier to being who you are called to be. It's about a system that says, you may have all of the qualifications and a call, and you sense a call from a Holy Spirit to lead in our church, and you can't do it simply because you were born a woman, right? So it's a different kind of political story. To me, it's much more about a call to be who you are fully called to be, as opposed to something that directly affects our political system. But in this day and age, that has become political. We might not like that. We might disagree with that. But saying that something needs to change, some might see that as a political statement.
Well, there were times through it, and as a documentarian, I'm sure this is something that motivates you, especially a project that clearly took a long time to develop and to see to fruition, that there's a timeliness about it. I mean, when you hear these men talking about, women aren't qualified, or I mean, there was so much resonance for today. Was that something you were aware of while you were making it, or has that surfaced recently, or what about that? I mean, when one of them says something like a woman can't be a rooster, or something to that effect, I mean, I'm just thinking about the debates we're hearing in Congress now over reproductive rights.
In 2012, when I first had that conversation with Carter, I didn't, we were in a very different political moment in our country than we are now. But maybe that inability to foresee what would happen, we started actually filming this in 2015. Again, a different political moment, right? We were having very different conversations. But I think perhaps this story is more important than I realized that it would be, because in many ways they're showing us how we have to continue to stand up to be who we're called to be, and how that conversation is, I always had the sense that it's still very relevant, but it's just overtly relevant today, right?
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, Margot, how you went about getting, besides Carter, the other women, and even then some of the men, the priests, who are still alive. Um, Obviously, with something like this, I imagine that as the women are aging and some of them have passed away, there was an excitement about having their story told. Was that something that you found as you reached out to them?
We always wanted the women to tell their own story. That was a guiding principle for us when we started the project. And obviously that was only going to be some of them, because some of them had passed away. As you see in the film, the backlash was very real. It was a very intense time for them, and it was hard. I mean, as it is today for people who stand up and follow a call that is not popular or goes against the grain. It's not easy to do, and the backlash can be very personal and very intense. And so some of them were not excited to hear from us. They just, we were just, media was hounding them in the 70s. And, to some extent they succeeded because the media followed the story very closely, and that gave them a platform. And having the local news on your doorstep every day, or following you noticing that you're depositing a check at the bank, that's not a fun way to live. And so, we earned their trust over time, and everybody who's living has participated in the film. So that, there has been full participation.
Yeah, yeah. Um, the archival footage was just amazing. Um, I, I, I mean, as a documentarian, that's obviously something you'd be very familiar with, but some of this seemed so, I just couldn't even believe there was that much sound footage and photographs of those conferences, because it's not like, it was just amazing to me. And the footage in the churches when they were ordained. Talk a little
There's
bit
a lot
about those
more.
discussions.
Yeah, there
There's
is
more.
more. We could probably have an hour conversation about how this story has not made it into the history books, and why. Because it was on the nightly news on a regular basis between 1974 and 1976. And we had three networks then: CBS, NBC, and ABC. They all covered it. So there's a lot of footage. We also spent a lot of time looking for footage in not so obvious places to find gems, right? To find things that we couldn't cover today because, for example, Sue Hyatt has passed away. So how can we bring her into the film? She's a key leader of this effort. Just because she's passed away, that doesn't mean her story shouldn't be included. So we spent a lot of time looking for it. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, there is a lot of footage out there.
Yeah, and the talk shows I mean, that it was on firing line. You see, so that just must have been exciting to uncover so much material that was out there in the media.
It's one of the reasons we made the film, to be honest. I mean, of course, I'm very drawn to this. I feel like it should be part of our understanding of movement history in America, and how, and of the women's movement. And I think it's crucial today. But we wouldn't have made it if there hadn't been this much archive, and it was a lot of fun to find it. And it's a big reason why the film is what it is.
I was struck by the scenes of the conferences. It looked like you used a lot of still photographs, and then there was this layered sound where it was different voices, men and women, saying either they were in favor of it or not. But it sounded like it was just a really interesting sound design with the still photographs, because I assume there wasn't any actual film footage.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. If we had had film footage, we would have used it. You're correct about that. The audio is the actual recording, though, of those conventions. So those are the real debates from those conventions, and we wanted to bring in the audio since we found the audio. Speaking of fun
but
finds, that was one of them.
the way you did it though gave it such an immediacy. I mean, I was listening to the layered sound and then looking at the pictures, and I thought it was really done in a way that was very compelling. I mean, I felt like I was there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and not having moving footage does help us listen to the audio more deeply sometimes. So there's a benefit there.
Some of the lines were like the one I said before about the rooster, and just, I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so depressing, I guess.
There's a lot more of that. I mean, we made choices to remember that we only need them to say that once, right? There's no reason to over focus on it. It's a belief. It's a, it's the when we talk about women's ministry, it's one thing, and then when we talk about the priesthood, this understanding of a gender hierarchy cannot be avoided, right? It's one thing to say, oh, women can do some things, but then this very specific topic brings out a gendered hierarchy that isn't spoken of but that's understood, and really forces folks to be honest about it. And that's, I think, why we get some of that.
Were there any of the priests that did you reach out to anyone that also did not want to be in it? I mean, you said the women may have been reluctant, but they were in it. Were there any of the priests that weren't? I know that Peter Beebe is obviously there, but he was an ally. Any of the ones that were not allies? Did you get
Um,
any no's?
Yeah, we did get. I had really wanted. So the Reverend George Rutler, who there's archival footage of him at the Church of the Advocate, standing up and opposing the ordinations, and we reached out. I reached out multiple email conversations with him. I read all his books. Um, it would have been a different film if he had agreed to be interviewed, and I would have embraced that. I really wanted to, bring him in. He's living. He's one of the few who is in the archival as opposing and who's still living, but he didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we tried.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm sure viewers fans of documentaries, like I am and many of our viewers are, will recognize a lot of local names. Nikki Bramley being one of them that we know from Boston area or local documentaries. I wonder how that is for you as a local filmmaker to have a crew of people that you've worked with before, that you can that you go through this whole process with, because I realize you said 2015, that's 9 years now. It's a long haul to create.
Completely. And this film would not be in existence if it weren't for Nikki. So she's known for being a fantastic cinematographer, director of photography here in the Boston area. And she took on a producing role on this film. And, she's one of the reasons, when we say they were hesitant at the beginning, and then, I would say, and I hope they're watching this, all of the women who were ordained in Philadelphia felt fantastic about the process after we started filming and got to know each other a little bit. And Nikki was a big part of that. She did a lot of producing on the film. And so, big shout out to her in terms of this coming to fruition. And there's a number of Boston folks who were a part of it. We always work local. We always work with each other. It's part of being a filmmaker in this city.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, technically, it's just it's just well done. The music is great, and the photography, the editing, as I mentioned, the sound that I particularly was struck by, the sound editing. we've talked about, you just mentioned several challenges, but I did wonder about any particular challenges with something that takes this long and where you're dealing with the clock in many ways. I mean, your interview subjects are aging and some have already passed on. Um, but what are some of the other particular challenges with a project like this, Margot?
Well, the aging was an issue. We knew that would be an issue from the very beginning because of the age of the women we were with. And that's one reason that this film is what it is, because of Nikki jumping in. So we didn't have any money, and she said, I'm all in. You know, she's an excellent cinematographer. Having an excellent cinematographer being all in when there's no funding is a huge plus for any project. So, you know, a lot of those interviews we shot very early on without funding because we just were both all in to do that. We wanted to get those in the can while the women could still be as articulate as they are in the film. Bishop Barbara Harris passed on after that. You know, the Reverend Allison Cheek passed on, and yet they're still able to be storytellers in the film. So that was a gift. You know, as with many documentary films, financing is a challenge. This one was uniquely challenging. You know, to me, this film is for a wide audience, and I think a lot of funders felt like it might be a church audience film. And so we had to do a lot of work to help folks understand that this is really a film for a wide audience. And we're stumbling to do that. And so, you know, the story is on our website, but we built a movement to tell the story and did multiple rounds of crowdfunding, pulled together a film funder circle that would meet monthly, and really built a community around the call to tell the story. And if it weren't for that, then the film still wouldn't be here today.
Mm-hmm. Have you shown it to church communities, or I mean, there must be an educational component to the film.
Yeah, this film is in the midst of a very wide ranging screening tour. So if you go to our website, Philadelphia11film.com, you can spell out the word 11. You will see where it's been all over the country, remote places, urban centers, hosted by film festivals, churches, libraries. It's been all over the place. And in large part because word of mouth, right? So people telling each other about the film. And it will have an educational distributor, which we're going to be announcing soon, and we're working to secure other distribution for the film.
So for people who want to tell their friends to see it and want to make sure or want to see it again, what happens after this, after GlobeDocs?
Yeah, so it's good. Again, go to our website, Philadelphia11film.com. It's playing all over the country. I think we're up to 230 screenings. And we're doing a limited theatrical in May. That announcement will be coming soon. It will be available for universities and other higher ed to purchase very soon. And we're looking for, you know, we're working on the rest of what everyone else wants. So streaming opportunities, you know, maybe a broadcast. So we'll have more news on that soon. But just sign up for our newsletter online and you'll be the first to get that news.
On the website, right? Now, when it has shown in places, or when I was looking things up, I did see that some of the women had gone to some screenings. Did you go with them? Did they attend? And what was that like to have them be present at the?
We had a big premiere in Philadelphia, as is appropriate, I think, where everybody came. We all came together. They had a very special panel discussion, and we were able to celebrate together, and that was very meaningful. And you know, we've done some others together. There've been a lot of screenings, so you know, we haven't been able to go to all of them together. And in fact, I haven't been at most of them. You can imagine I would be not even sleeping if I had. But it's been very special to be at screenings together.
Yeah. Now, Margot, you mentioned Paulie Murray, which, you know, viewers may know. There's that documentary called My Name is Paulie Murray. What was it that because she's a very interesting figure in your film. You said that's kind of how you came to it. What was the film that you were making, or the project you were working on about her?
Yeah, at that point I was just reading and developing different ideas, but I had read Paulie Murray's autobiography, which does talk about these ordinations in Philadelphia. And in fact, she talks about them in a beautiful way. So if anybody's interested in reading a very eloquent, emotionally moving recount of the ordinations in Philadelphia, I recommend her autobiography. It was early on in so it was early on in just sort of developing different ideas. But that is how I got to Carter, through Paulie Murray.
I
And
think
for a
she
while,
was
I
a
will say, we weren't planning on including Paulie Murray in this film until a later rough cut. Because if I'm being totally honest, I mean, I think that of Paulie Murray as a leading figure, and I was confused. I don't think that's the right word, but how do you bring someone in and honor them when they're actually on the other side of the story you're telling, right? And then I realized, well, that is actually important. It is really important to show how in disagreement we can be in solidarity. And what Carter said about her was such a great way to represent, in a film you can't, there's just isn't time to talk about everything, but to represent this disagreement about whether or not they should move forward in this way or wait till there's another official vote. So I think it actually worked out quite well, but it was at a later stage in the filmmaking process.
yeah, that was fascinating because I think she was ordained in Boston or Cambridge.
Actually, she lived here. She was at Brandeis, but she was ordained at the cathedral in Washington, D.C.
Okay, yeah. What just to wrap up, Margot, in general, what do you hope this film does now that it's out in the world? And I'm sure you're glad it's out there, but do you have any particular hopes for how it may reach people, how it may touch people, what difference it could make?
I believe that we really need to understand the stories of those who've come before us in order to learn important lessons and build a better future without having to repeat the past. And I also, as we discussed, I think there a lot of what they went through is happening today. And so I hope that the film is an opportunity for folks to be inspired, to ask hard questions about what it takes to build a world where we can all be who we're called to be, and to learn those lessons and stand on the shoulders of these women as we forge forward.
Wonderful. The film is the Philadelphia 11, and Margot Guernsey, you're the director, producer, and a very articulate and interesting guest. So thank you so much for sharing your journey and your process with us here at GlobeDocs. Thanks
Thank
to all of you who stuck around for the conversation. Do you have anything else to add, Margot?
I was just going to thank you for a wonderful conversation. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that you all enjoyed the film.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much and goodbye.